Before we begin, I want to just say a couple of thank yous, if you'll just indulge me for a second. And the first person I want to thank who spearheaded this effort in our office, somebody I have relied on for many years now as borough president to do the heavy lifting when it comes to our major projects and development and taking on very big issues and projects. So please give a warm round of applause to the Deputy Borough President of Manhattan, Rose Pierre-Louis. Rose, it's like Biden. You got to come out and wave. Come on. She's not shy, trust me. I also want to thank our Director of Policy and has put so much of his brain power to use, Scott Schell, Director of Policy. Scott, where are you? And two great staffers really took the lead in our office for many, many months. The first is Reggie Thomas's. Where's Reggie? Give Reggie a round of applause. He worked so hard. Reggie. And Jenny Clapp from our policy unit. Where's Jenny? Jennifer Clapp. Thank you very much. And I also want to thank every single member of our office who worked on this through the many, many months. And of course, I want to thank the amazing steering committee that really went to work over the last couple of months to put this together. Too many of you to shout out, but many of you on the panel know their contributions. Give the steering committee an amazing round of applause. They did a great, great job. So to the person who's going to moderate, I can't think of someone more appropriate to moderate the last segment with this distinguished panel. I want to introduce you to her, and I know she's been referenced many times today, but I just want to remind you who Esther Fuchs is. She's a professor of public affairs and political science at Columbia University and director of urban policy concentration at SEPA. She served as special advisor to the mayor for governance and strategic planning under Mayor Bloomberg from 2001 to 2005. But before joining the Bloomberg administration, Dr. Fuchs was professor of political science at Barnard College, chair of the Urban Studies program at Barnard and Columbia Colleges, and founding director of Columbia University's Center for Urban Research and Policy. After receiving, I'm going to do this, Esther, after receiving her BA from Queens College, CUNY, she went on to receive her MA from Brown University, followed by a PhD in political science from the University of Chicago. I'm going to stop here because we don't have that much time. But it suffices to say that this woman is a brilliant educator and navigator of this city, so much so that she was the first woman to chair a New York City Charter Vision Commission in 2005. And if I were the mayor, I'd pick her to chair the next one, but that's not up to me. Well, you never know. But, just kidding. But, all right, that just, no, anyway. All right, that was between us. But really, I want to thank Esther Fuchs and Columbia again, because she not only gave us the smarts and the brilliance and her vision, but she actually rolled up her sleeves and did the work with Rose and everybody in the steering committee. Give a warm welcome to the person who's going to close the session for us, Esther Fuchs. Dr. Esther Fuchs.
I have the easy job here today. Thank you so much, Scott, Borough President Stringer. He is amazing. Really, let's a round of applause for him. You know, I have to say, we go into these kinds of things with some skepticism. After many years, all of us here have been working together on a variety of policy issues, many of us for a very long time. So this is very, very exciting day today, I have to say. I've been at a lot of these kinds of events, but I really haven't been in a group of such extraordinarily talented and smart people, not just the people who organized it, but all of you who have worked so hard today, I think, to bring to fruition what we're going to be talking about in the last session today. So give yourselves a round of applause for spending the day here today on something very, very important. I really believe that. I think it's this is the next true important policy challenge facing our city, our nation, and of course the world. And we expect to get ahead of the curve in New York, as we always do. It's my pleasure to close out the conference today and do the wrap-up with this extraordinary panel. And we're going to start our presentations by literally just going through the findings of each of the working groups that you all participated in. I can't emphasize enough that the success of this summit today has been dependent upon everybody's engagement. You all worked very hard after our keynote speakers this morning. We did have extraordinary keynote speakers, I have to say. Each one of them gave a different perspective and something valuable to this event. But really the hard work of turning the discussion into policy and seeing it operationalized and implemented on the ground will be the result of the work of the working groups, and that's going to be reflected in this discussion now. It's not enough, as we all know, to talk. We have to figure out how to get action into projects and into programs, and I know that our speakers this afternoon are going to help us articulate that. The first speaker of our breakout session number 1 is Ali Kent, and he'll be addressing From Field to Market, a Blueprint for Food Distribution.
Hi. So I'm actually not quite sure what we're going to see on the screen, but we're going to walk through this. So I was in the distribution workshop. We had several really great speakers and then opened it up to the room for some going through the problems and causes and then the ideas for solutions. And we boiled it down to, I think, 5 major ones when we finally looked at everything together. So the first problem that came up was this notion of a lack of public awareness and education. What does buying local mean? Understanding seasonality, what is grown locally and when, so that people can make more educated choices. Another had to do with truck distribution. The distribution system is unbalanced. There's too many trucks in some places and not enough trucks in others. And then also just the notion of cleaning up the distribution network, the truck network, getting off of diesel if we can. The third was a lack of resources for small food businesses in terms of access to credit or subsidies or other incentives that would be, just all kinds of good that are connected to, it's connected to a lack of direct government support for healthy local produce. So seeing that as sort of an overall strategy of looking at where the city is allocating its resources. The fourth was a lack of a wholesale farmers market facility where regional farmers could come and make their goods more available to a wider audience in New York. And then finally, another problem was the lack of or need for a regional distribution infrastructure and cooperation between these things, between farmers and consumers. There's a lot of folks that are sort of doing this individually or finding these connections individually, but not a lot of coordination. And we found that a lot of the solutions were linked directly to these problems. So the potential solutions that we dreamed up, looking at land use policy as sort of an overarching theme, came in. So the need for subsidies or credits, an EIS process for local bodegas and vendors, supermarkets, all the food systems, infrastructural players, and connected to it. Actually, this last one, number 5 on here, again has to do with land use, but supporting the development of localized food processing and manufacturing. So getting more of that work and more of those jobs connected to food into the city again. And to also deal with things like food and vegetable waste that maybe can't be sold through a retail outlet but can be turned into something that's value added. Number 2 on here, farmers' food distribution hubs. So sub-hubs. There's a lot of talk about developing Hunts Point, making it a better, just a more improved market. There's a lot of things that it needs help with in order to be able to support the food needs of the city and of the purveyors, but also how can there be other networked either distribution centers or warehouses or places where people can go more locally, where farmers might be able to not only go to a green market once or twice a week, but also be able to drop produce or bring a larger amount of produce that could be at another distribution center somewhere else in the city, so that institutional buyers or other larger buyers might be able to access that on a more regular basis. 3 here was just looking again at the trucking system, so cleaner, more coordinated, aggregating product together, and just trying to help utilize the infrastructure that we have already, but add value to it, make it more efficient and effective. And then number 4 on here is looking at mostly procurement policy for the city, challenging New York to really look into where it's buying all this food, really challenging it to buy locally, again, which would, we hope, support better distribution networks for that food to actually get to people that need access to it. And that's what we got.
Okay, our second speaker will present for the second breakout session, Finding Healthy Food, Supermarkets, Farmers Markets, CSAs, and Food Desserts, Anthony Borelli.
Hello, good afternoon. So the name of our breakout session was Finding Healthy Food. It was about supermarkets, farmers markets, CSAs, and food deserts. We had a pretty engaging conversation. We all wish we had a little bit more time. But let me just list for you our top problems and solutions. Our first item, and these aren't necessarily prioritized 1 through 5, but the 5 that rose to the top were, we felt that healthy food is not available in every neighborhood. That in and of itself is a problem. We talked about why it's not available. We talked about the types of infrastructure that's needed to support the availability of healthy foods in neighborhoods, but the fact that some neighborhoods don't have healthy food was the problem. We felt that there could be better education and awareness about where to find healthy food, how to make healthy food, how to purchase healthy food. So we felt that was a problem. We knew that the lack of healthy food related to health problems in neighborhoods. You heard a little bit about that, or actually a lot about it this morning as part of the keynote addresses. We talked about the economic conditions that cause the lack of affordability and options. I think what that meant was that you need to be able to afford to buy healthy food, and what were the obstacles and what are the obstacles to affordability. You need to have a job. You need to have a job that pays well. Stores that are in the neighborhood need to be able to afford rents so that they can provide food at reasonable prices. And lastly, we talked about structural prejudices that affect people's decisions in terms of locating green markets or supermarkets in areas that desperately need them. We talked about racism and how that plays into people's thinking. We also talked about some of the need to be more aware and to better understand underserved neighborhoods, not as places that don't deserve supermarkets, but in fact are great markets for them. And that reflects a lot on what Maya spoke about this morning. As far as our solutions go, we have 3 here. We thought it was really important to engage and empower communities to be meaningfully engaged in the decision-making process. we felt that they needed to be part of the discussion around land use decisions, about the city's own strategic planning for how to use its land resources. And we talked about how to prepare and to equip communities, particularly underserved communities, to be more meaningfully engaged in the decision-making process. We talked about creating incentives in zoning and in tax and subsidy policy to make it easier for supermarkets to locate to underserved areas and to remain there, knowing that price points are very critical in making it possible for supermarkets to stay in place. And lastly, we talked about increasing education and awareness in communities, not just about what healthy food is and where to find it, but also about awareness in how to engage in the public realm, in the decision-making process, making sure that people know where they can go if they have concern about losing a supermarket or not being able to find healthy food in other places. So those are three of many more solutions we talked about. I'm actually looking forward to the days and weeks ahead where me and other members of our office consolidate all of this into one combined document. So thank you.
Our third speaker is Alexa Vanderwall, and she'll be representing breakout session number 3, the importance of nutrition education.
Hi there. We covered a lot in nutrition education. We talked about sort of the history of the food supply and sort of how we got ourselves here, and the foods that are in the center aisle of the grocery stores got us here. We talked about some of the programs nationally, statewide, and locally that are designed to really help build some awareness and very concrete education programs. And lastly, we talked about nutrition education and policy nationally and locally, where we can really make some differences around food education. Not surprisingly, I think this is a theme that's going to come up in many of the groups, is food access and affordability was a really big problem in the neighborhood disparities. Second, we talked about the site and the scope just really complicates issues. Basically, the enormity of some of the statistics that were raised this morning around obesity and certainly sickness, and especially in some of the underserved neighborhoods. Inadequate or lack of education available. And part of that really has to do with the fact that cities and federal governments have very little money to do nutrition education, and we're up against budgets in the range of $500 million in advertising budgets for McDonald's, and hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on candy and snacks and those kinds of things, and as well as the consistency of messages that we're giving people. Nutrition is a very complicated message. It's not like smoking, where you can say don't smoke, it's going to kill you. It's much, you can't say don't eat. It's much more complicated than that. In the schools and other communities, the inadequate experiential nutrition education. I know when I was growing up, we had cooking classes in school. We don't have that consistently. And teaching the teachers was another thing that came up. And, I touched on the media, but the barriers created by media and the lack of media literacy. Children look at TV ads and take them very literally. They don't understand that a big company is spending a lot of money to manipulate them into begging their parents to take them to McDonald's because they want a Happy Meal and a toy. What are the potential solutions? Use universities to educate students better, whether it's this university or NYU or Hunter, Integrative Nutrition. There are armies of people out there who have either graduated from those schools or in those schools now, who can be trained to really help put some resources on the ground and get some more education out there. Create targeted campaigns for certain groups of people. And, you know, I think there's an awful lot of people who really still don't understand that what you eat affects your health outcomes, and that the food supply is actually making us really sick. Nutrition education is also culinary education, access and affordability. Nutrition education is really also understanding sort of what's involved in making your food, literally from seed to buying it in the store and serving it up. Inspiring people to eat better, which is hard. Changing behavior is hard. And lastly, educating the educators, getting teachers and other people on the front line, really trying to communicate a very clear message about what healthy foods are and what happens to, what can potentially happen to you if you don't eat healthy foods. And that's where we ended up. We had dozens of other ideas, and we're allowed to present 5, so I will pass it to the next one.
Thank you. Breakout session number 4, urban farming, what does it look like? Who makes it work? Michael Conrad will present. That is Professor Michael.
Professor Fuchs. Thank you. We had the easy job of actually being in the solutions category. Urban farming is obviously something that we are very interested in, not only understanding how it works, but also to expand it. So our session was about the problems and the solutions, but significantly about how to scale it up, how to enhance the people that are already engaged in producing. We were co-moderated by actually three producers, both the urban and para-urban farms. So what were our 4 problems? The lack of knowledge, dissemination, and communication. And this really had to do with the silos, the kind of the isolated nature of a lot of the enormously good work that's actually happening, but the lack of both understanding about how to either initiate, expand, coordinate, network, clearly a gap, clearly a need within the community that's doing enormous work right now. The lack of land access and development. We've had a long discussions about what I would call sites, not only accessible lands within the city, potential parklands that we would call, productive parks where various sort of public agencies could companion with local growers to utilize marginalized or underutilized or over or understaffed areas in the city for production, but also buildings. How to enhance incentives within development where there actually might be value in the long term within a larger sort of systemic look at the problem for growing as a kind of a fundamental piece of the equation in an urban economy. Clearly taxation, clearly incentives, floor area ratio, not including, for example, greenhouses in calculating area of buildings was something that we had discussed. Limit post-production infrastructure. This had to do with sort of understanding that there actually is some significant production going on in the city, but then what do you do with the produce? What do you do with the farmers that are coming in with a trailer or a small truck? There's lack of refrigeration, lack of storage, lack of processing. So that's a clear sort of hurdle that we need to jump. The lack of accessible capital and markets. clearly this is, we know from a number of people that we were going to need to see a number of additional farmers enter our workforce. And clearly we've found understood from Fred at Stone Barn that the challenge that they have is not finding the farmers right now, but the potential farmers finding access to capital and potential markets. So what do we see as the potential solutions? Obviously supporting research, networks, and partnerships. Clearly today is a huge beginning in doing that. It was an enormous number of cards and handshakes and meetings even set up within our group about going to Stone Barn or us going to added value or seeing what people are actually doing. The opportunities of maybe creating wikis and networks, not only within the producers themselves, but within institutions. The opportunity for the good things going on locally to add to and change even primary and secondary educational policies. So food actually becomes critical and central to life, to education, to planning, to policy. Changing land use policy, clearly that becomes part of it, but also that one would imagine that there could be expedited review and approval processes. Clearly we are in a crisis situation and they need to be thinking about this in different ways. There are enormous bureaucracies, hurdles that many people expressed within the approval and the reviews processes, and we need to look for expedited ways of getting this good work moved forward. I mentioned storage and refrigeration infrastructure, and clearly also at the solution for expanding capital and markets, obviously looking for new models for both of those. Thank you.
Breakout session number 5 will be presented by Christina Grace, How Schools, Hospitals, and Other Institutions Can Serve Healthier Meals. Thank you.
Hi. First I want to say, I wish I was in all the breakout sessions because all this information is so connected. And I really don't have anything I need to say because so much of what we talked about in our session has been covered in a lot of these other sessions, so it's great to see all of the connections across the board. When we were talking about healthier foods in institutions, we focused our discussion a lot on hospitals and schools. And we focused on more nutritious foods. We talked a lot about local and, of course, a food network system that decreases the environmental footprint of what's being used in all these places. So there were lots of different pieces. Now, in terms of problems, you see we have low funding allocated to institutional food. And just using New York City school food and Mount Sinai, a participating hospital in our group, as an example, say at school food, there's about $2.50 to spend on all the things that go into putting a meal together, and about $1, actually 97 cents, goes to food. And at Mount Sinai, they get to spend $1.60 on food. And imagine trying to prepare a healthy, whole food, lots of fresh vegetable meal at home for your whole family per head for $1, and see where you get. The disproportionate influence on the food industry. The food industry has influence on public policy. They have influence on the distribution system. Of course, they have influence on the products entering the market, and through billions and billions of dollars in advertising, they have a ton of influence on food preferences. And that's what we're up against. Lack of regional distribution and infrastructure, which a lot of folks have spoken about, and a system that has been subsidized to handle transcontinental distribution versus a regional food system. Talked a lot about education, staff, and labor, because within the institutions, such as schools and hospitals, it is so important that food service staff are on board with all the kinds of healthy changes we're talking about. Are they promoting vegetable-based entrees and healthier food options, and are they how much they know about the food that's on the table, how much training is happening in these kitchens. People have to know how to cut fresh vegetables. They have to know how to do certain things, have to have certain culinary skills to handle the kinds of foods we want to see coming into our institutions. And that takes time and costs money. In the case of New York City School Foods, when you're talking about 10,000 people or 8,000 people that need to be trained, that's a huge monumental task to make sure that every cook and person working in a kitchen is up to speed on all these different things and has those skills. And this experienced staff costs money. And we talked about institutional facilities, what equipment is available. Our facilities up to speed to handle. We have schools where you can prepare a lot of fresh food. You have satellite schools where all the food is being brought in. Hospitals, it's the same deal, though, in terms of being built to handle food coming through an industrial food system that's largely processed, and saying all of a sudden, well, we want to use a lot of fresh food. We want to be cooking from scratch. Do we have a restaurant-style kitchen that can handle that? And then we talked about marketing, education in general, and the inconsistent messaging. In hospitals, we have a huge opportunity to connect the clinical side. Okay, we're trying to make people healthy. They come in, we're sending them nutrition messages, and then we're serving them McDonald's concessions in the hospital. That's inconsistent messaging. In the schools, where kids are getting nutrition education, and then they've got competitive foods that they can choose that are competing with school meals that are less healthy options, or they can go right outside the school and buy fast food. How do we handle that? So how do we reinforce these messages and deal with the predatory marketing that goes on, especially to youth and children? So our solutions. What do we got here? Well, I can start. I'm sorry. The first reallocation of funds to training, education, to, of course, food, fresh, healthy food options, and to facilities. And this includes looking, especially around schools. We have a great opportunity with the child nutrition reauthorization in looking at reimbursement rates and trying to get more money federally, from the state, locally, to support the healthy foods that we want to see in our schools. Universal school meals, so that we remove the stigma in schools for school lunch, so that every child can participate, and also so that greater amounts of funding come into the school food budget. And we want to see more we want to eliminate competitive foods and junk foods in the schools. And we talked about, attached to this, we want to see more vegetable-based, more whole foods. And when we say vegetable-based, not just side dishes, but looking at vegetable-based entrees that include legumes and healthy protein options as well. We talked about redirecting subsidies towards regional and local. We want to see the same local distribution options that most folks have talked about in their sessions today. We'd love to see the wholesale farmers market here in New York City. We'd like to see more money spent on fresh fruits and vegetables federally, and state supports for this, and of course New York City support for all this great work. And finally, we talked about a junk food tax. This can be revenue generating. There was a lot of discussion this morning around smoking. So how do we incent the good choices and disincent the bad choices? So that is where we ended. But it was like everyone else, an incredibly deep and broad discussion, and we've covered some highlights.
Thank you. Our breakout session number 6 will be Karen Pearl presenting Recession's Consequence for the Food Safety Net 2009.
Hello. Okay, let's see. Okay. We also had a very, very good conversation. Our topic was the effect of the recession on the food safety net, and suffice it to say that we all agreed that the effect of the recession was quite extreme and very much fraying of the safety net, as there's more and more people in need and fewer resources. And we identified 3 key problems, although we had a list much longer, but we tried to collapse it into just these 3. The first was insufficient access to food stamps, and we thought that there were 2 issues there, and one was the one of stigma. As more people are in need, they're still reluctant to come forward and say that they are in need, and therefore they don't take advantage of a benefit that actually could help them a lot. And then the other is lack of awareness, is that a lot of people don't even know what the eligibility criteria might be. They don't know whether or not they are eligible. They don't know how to find out. And so people are not taking advantage of something that actually is a federally funded benefit that could very much help people. The second was the inefficient distribution of both resources and the inefficient distribution of our systems around food. And so that there are a number of networks that are being underutilized or that are actually lacking in their development. And then there's also a misallocation of subsidies, so that we have, for instance, in some neighborhoods, there are subsidies for some fast food restaurants to come on in, like tax incentives or whatever. But really, there are no subsidies for green markets or for healthier providers, and that we really need to look at flipping that around so that we're bringing healthier food into neighborhoods where there isn't any. And then the third issue that we identified was the need to engage the community more, that there really is a lack of value and a lack of recognition of service, and that so many food programs really do rely so heavily on volunteerism that it would be very, very important that we start to ratchet up the sense of value in people donating their time and donating their resources. So, some potential solutions, and I got a note that said, I'm afraid that I'm concerned that all of the things that you said aren't on your slide. So I think they're not. So ignore the slide for a minute. I'm going to talk to you about solutions. The first solution we're going to do all 3, and I will be fast on this. The first is food stamps. And people in our group felt that we really had, again, a couple of things to suggest. And one is that we really need to increase resources for an effective outreach campaign that addresses the 2 things I talked about in the problems. One is that people know what food stamps are and whether or not they're eligible, and the other is the stigma. And we talk very specifically about different ways of doing that, but certainly some innovative ideas which will be captured in the notes, but I'll just give you one, that there is such a huge digital divide in some of our communities, and we talked specifically in this context about seniors. And so much of our information now is on the internet, and seniors just don't really have that access or don't really feel comfortable with it. So one thing to do perhaps as part of this campaign is to help senior centers get the technology they need to work with their seniors so that seniors can actually find out about benefits, not only food stamps, but in general that they might be eligible for. The second was to change many of the rules and regulations around getting access to the food stamp program. And things like finger imaging, required face-to-face meetings, people having to come every 6 months instead of every 12 months. That there were all of these things that make it harder for people to sign up and stay enrolled. And the third was increasing resources to CBOs so that they could do a couple of things: become more politically engaged, also help with the digital divide, and also help with the education and outreach around food stamps and get people signed up. The second concern was about the distribution system, and here we also had 3 recommendations. One was increasing funding for capacity building at emergency food programs. There's already some support to help organizations buy things like refrigerators and freezers, but we could ratchet that up so people could actually get even more fresh and healthy food on hand. The second was creating incentives to go green, whether that's for bodegas to stock fresh food, whether that's for agencies to get better policies that help the environment in terms of some of their work. But it was important to try to incentivize that. And the third was to strengthen, both in number and then also to formalize the regional food networks, which a lot of people have talked about. And then third, as it relates to community involvement, getting more people to value and get engaged in volunteerism. Again, we had 3 recommendations, and one was to think about our educational institutions, which are all over the city, as really undervalued assets, not just in terms of the education they provide to the students, but also that they're a space that could be opened far more hours than it is that they are currently opened. They're a place where people where there is often excess food that can be picked up and delivered to other places, and also that has a natural constituency base of volunteers called students who could, in terms of their service learning programs, get engaged in helping out in soup kitchens, pantries, all the different food providers. The second was to strengthen the partnership between food providers and corporations in terms of service days. And then the last was really to work together, and our group was happy that we are about to start a new administration in Washington that will be starting some service programs and raising the value on volunteerism and the recognition for volunteerism, and we're very excited about that and believe that the safety net will be greatly helped. Thank you.
Our final panelist will report out on breakout session number 7, Kate McKenzie, the Urban Food Agenda, Shaping City, State, and Federal Policy.
So the oddity about this session was that it was a policy session, but as we've heard, every single session has had policy outcomes come out of them, and I think you'll find it assuring that what has emerged in our themes of problems and solutions are complementary to a lot of the things that we've just heard. So a sort of summary of the top 4 problems is the first, that there's not enough investment and access to food support programs. We had a challenge in that we had a very, very large group. We had over 200 people in our breakout. And the food stamp program, the school meals program, the WIC program, through the safety net programs that we've all spoken about were really rose to the surface of a major problem with regard to access and the investment that we need to ensure that more people can take advantage of those programs, both young children and older adults as well. We've focused not so much in the content of specific policies, but the process in setting policy as well. And one of those things is the lack of a very comprehensive and inclusive food agenda for New York City. There was sort of resounding sentiment that we have been doing a lot of the same thing for a very long time, and we need to be much more inclusive in the types of things that we consider to be on our food agenda. And that food agenda should not just be a spoken agenda, but it should actually be written and measurable at the same time. The third problem is the need to use regional food capabilities to their full potential. We have obviously seen a lot of talk about what we have in this state and in this region and our need, but there's not been a lot of the mapping or the ability to connect the dots to make a full system truly work. And finally, the need to create more living wage jobs was a resounding thrust within the group. So some of the potential solutions to these problems, and they go in line with the corresponding piece. The first is we need more champions to carry messages to federal, state, city, and community policymakers. It was noted, and I think it was the first time in history over the course of this last Farm Bill, Mayor Bloomberg wrote a letter to Washington to outline the needs for New York City, and that was very, very a wonderful thing to do. And it can't stop there. We've got a transportation bill coming up. We have child nutrition reauthorization. There's many, many other bills that also provide an opportunity for the city to really make their priorities known, and we need to act on that. We need to coordinate the development of an agenda across public and private sectors. So, whether it is getting more people from the corporate sector, from the nonprofit sector, or others, to carry some of the messages. In that Farm Bill piece that I just mentioned, it was noted that New York City doesn't have anybody on the Congressional House Agriculture Committee, and we need to do something about that. If we want to see more activities and work coming into this city, we need more champions in different places and with different partners. We're again mentioning the fact that we've got planning here, which is fabulous, and the other sectors which have not traditionally been in partnership with the food agenda. We needed a development of a regional food agenda, investment in food processing and innovation, and creating linkages in food systems. This speaks obviously to our regional distribution system. And while we've got food and we've got markets, sometimes that food needs to be processed in a way that some of our institutional markets can use as we're ratcheting up to go to scale with Whole Foods in the way that we all want to do. And finally, we need tax, this was mentioned in some of the other sessions, but we need tax incentives and other incentives for businesses for living wage jobs. So if a business wants to start in a community that is low income, people do not have a high unemployment rate, we really need to be incentivizing those businesses to go in there. And also to make mention that something that came up in the session was the quality food, the available quality food in these supermarkets and in these food outlets, and the fact that in some communities it's just not as healthy as others. So other incentives that would encourage more access to healthy foods. And in closing, I just want to say that I want to commend the group that got together. I felt did a really good job about listening to our audience. It was very hard to get all questions and everyone a chance to speak. And for those of you who didn't, really to take advantage of the cards that were out there, because it's, part of the process of change and the process of policy is listening to people who historically we've not listened to, and that was also our final sort of needed change.
Thank you. Before I call on our borough president to close the summit this afternoon, I just want to make one final comment. This summit was organized in a very interesting way. It was meant to be inclusive and all-engaging. And in the process of organizing it, all of these different areas around food policy emerged. And many people were skeptical, and they said, how would the people interested in nutrition talk to the people who are interested in urban farming? And how would the people interested in food distribution and land use policy talk to the people who are interested in food justice and the food safety net? And how would we all talk to each other, really? And one of the extraordinary things about both this morning and this afternoon and the wrap-up is not only did everybody talk to each other, as was said, they listened to each other. Not only did they listen to each other, but what we have here now is the beginning of that blueprint, of that plan to really change the direction of public policy. And I'm very much looking forward to the next steps. And now it's my pleasure to call on the borough president to end our summit and begin the next steps.
Again, thank you all for staying through the entire day. There's just about as many people here at the end and at the beginning, and that says a lot for what happened. Please, a round of applause for these moderators. They really worked very hard. There was one glitch with the nutritional education slide, and we will get the final set of solutions for this issue in the final report. And also you should know that there were 75 lunches that were not eaten, but they were not thrown out. They were donated to the food bank today, so I want all of you to know that. We made a little contribution. And here's what we're going to do now. And I want to tell you this before we adjourn. Our office is now going to compile the beginnings of a food charter and a food agenda. It's not just what was on the slide, but was also the backup to those slides. So if somebody said land use, a number of times, by the way, we're now going to flush that out through both what we learned at the breakout sessions and also reaching out to all of you once again. So do not, or I guess you should expect that our staff and our offices and our steering committee may very well come back to you individually to learn as much as we can, areas that weren't probed today, because we want to issue a full throttle report, a charter, so that we continue the work that we started here today. I want to make one promise. I know from a politician that's like, okay, well, here it comes, but I want to make one promise. This was not a one-shot deal. This wasn't about showing we could bring the smartest people in a room for a day and have an exercise. This is about following through, both in the work that we do on land use and zoning and the political life of the city. So if you stay with us through this process, we're going to stay engaged, I hope, for many years to come. So I want to thank each and every one of you. Have a great holiday season, and thank you all for participating.